So, yeah, um, climate change. I'm here in my volcano lair where I plan my villainous deeds. And, we got to talk about this climate change thing. They put climate change and they injected it into the ISO 9001 standard. And I'm frustrated and I don't know what to do about it. So I'll rant. I'll rant because that's what I'll do. In order to get climate change into the ISO 9001 standard and into all the other management system standards, they had to violate like all the ISO rules. ISO standards are supposed to be written on by consensus, and there was no consensus to put climate change in the standard. We know there was no consensus because there was no vote. ISO 9001 is a quality management system standard. It's supposed to be written by quality management subject matter experts and then voted on by international delegates who are also subject matter experts, and they decide. Now, none of that happened. There was a general vote saying, yeah, let's throw climate change in to everything, but it was never done at the level of the quality management system expert. It was just done globally. Then they issued this as an amendment. So again, this amendment was issued without formal voting per the rules that say that when you issue a standard or a revision or an amendment, it says you got to go through these draft stages, and each one has to be voted, and then it becomes a standard. None of that happened. And then, of course, the other thing is that typically and traditionally, when they update the standard, they impose a 3-year waiting period or a 3-year implementation period for companies to implement it. And this time they said it was effective immediately. So within the minute that it was published, this was already effective. You have to now address climate change inside your quality management system. And why did they do that? Why did all of this happen? Well, it happened because this guy, Mujica, Sergio Mujica from Chile, he's the head of ISO. He's the Secretary General ISO. And, well, I'll look at the clock. It's 2024. He runs out of term limits. He's term limited. He can't run again for ISO Secretary General in 2026, so he has 2 more years. Coincidentally, the United Nations is going to be holding its vote for the new Secretary General of the UN in 2026. So this whole thing has been to burnish his credentials. This whole thing about putting climate change into all these standards where it doesn't belong, like ISO 9001, is simply to make Sergio look good for the United Nations and to help a second person. That's Nigel Croft. Nigel Croft is a very influential person in TC 176 that writes the ISO 9001 standard. And he also works on the United Nations, the Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. He's done a little bit of consulting work for them for money. He gets paid by them for that. So it's not volunteer work. And so now he's got a taste of this whole United Nations thing, and he wants to get some kind of role at the UN as well. Because that's a high profile gig. It helps them sell more consulting services, et cetera. It just makes, it's ego. It's feeding their ego. So Croft and Mujica think that they're going to get into the United Nations if they push this idea of now ISO serious about climate change. And you just need to understand that this is not being done to actually help resolve the problem of climate, global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, none of that stuff. It's not. And you're being duped. You're being led to believe that it is. And it's not. It is to make 2 people improve their careers. And they've been able to manipulate, because they have total control of ISO, they've been able to manipulate the standards committees who are filled with consultants who are weak-minded, stupid people who just agree to whatever ISO says. And ISO said, we're going to do this. And they said, oh, okay, we'll do it. And then you got a couple people who voted at a high level, again, not at the committee level where it's supposed to happen, and they put it in there. And now what they've done is they've made an agreement with the IAF that says it's in effect immediately, so that you don't even get a 3-year period. Why don't you get a 3-year transition period to implement this? Because if you did, and I'll check the calendar again, we're in 2024, that means that it would go into effect in 2027, and that's 1 year after the elections at the United Nations. So Mujica had to put this in place immediately because he's trying to get into the United Nations. The other thing that's so frustrating to me, and I can't believe I'm seeing people that I respect in this industry, there's not many of those, but people I respect falling into this trap and talking about this thing as if it's a good idea. Now, back in 2015, Croft and his buddies, they duped us once, and they invented a thing called risk-based thinking. Risk-based thinking doesn't exist, and I've been saying it for almost 10 years now. It doesn't exist. And if you do a Google search and you filter the dates and you say risk-based thinking and you filter it for any time before 2014 or so, because they started having the draft leak by then. So there's no reference to that term whatsoever in any industry. There's one instance where a pharmaceutical study happened to string the words risk-based and thinking next to each other. One document, but they weren't talking about risk-based thinking or in any quality assurance sense of it. After that standard came out and after the draft started to come out in 2014 and 15, then suddenly Google explodes. So what does that tell you? It tells you that risk-based thinking didn't exist beforehand. Croft and his gang, they just made it up. And Croft told me personally that, he said, we'll figure out if it works later. And I remember telling him, that's not how standards work. The ISO 9001 standard is supposed to take proven concepts that we know work, like PDCA, the process approach, inspection, those kind of things. You put those into the standard because they've been proven by generations, or decades of experience in an industry. And they're now best practices. You can't make something up and put it in the standard and say, we'll see if it works later. And now here we are coming up on 10 years of risk-based thinking. And where's the evidence that it works? And there isn't any. But at the same time, all the consultants immediately, within about a couple weeks after Croft and BSI worked to issue a couple press releases on this, they started repeating the press releases and saying risk-based thinking was always in the standard. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It's made up. It's completely made up. Oh, it's part of the process approach. No, it isn't. Deming never spoke about it. You never heard of Deming didn't talk about risk at all. They made these things up and they literally lied and put the text in the standard. And then people, these weak-minded consultants who have no ability to think for themselves, just repeat it. They just keep repeating it and saying, yeah. So now here we are, coming up on 10 years of risk-based thinking. There's no evidence that it works. All it is an exercise that we do. We type some dumb things in a quality manual somewhere, procedure, an auditor comes and signs it off, and we still have airplanes falling out of the sky. It doesn't work. And why should it? Because it's an unproven, made-up thing that doesn't exist. So now here we are repeating it again. And I'm seeing these, respected consultants and figures in the ISO community and quality management, and then some other, and obviously the usual shysters, coming out and saying, oh, quality has always been about climate change. And how, of course you have to address climate change in your quality system. Why wouldn't you? As if those of us who look at it and say, we have an environmental system standard and a climate and a quality, they're different, that there's something wrong with us, that there's something mentally wrong with us, that we're crazy. And this is gaslighting. They're making us try to feel like we're crazy because we're sitting there trying to figure out, why did they put environmental rule inside the quality management system standard? It doesn't fit. It doesn't belong there. Why did they throw climate change in the cybersecurity standard? Why did they put climate change in adventure tourism standard? Or traffic symbols. They put it in all these standards where it doesn't make any sense, except when you realize this is about getting the ISO Secretary General elected to the United Nations as Secretary General. That's the only answer there is. Occam's razor and all that. So that's what we're stuck with. Now you have these famous people coming out and implying that you're crazy if you don't do this. Of course you have to do this. And so I've responded back by saying, okay, the United Nations had 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which sounds like something you catch at a brothel. Maybe that explains it. But they have 17 SDGs. ISO only picked one. Why did they pick climate change? Why that one to put in ISO 9001? For example, some of the other SDGs are to end poverty, to end hunger, universal health care, to stop war, right? These things are kind of important. Climate change is important. All of these other things are important. Human trafficking. That's a big problem. Why don't we put those in ISO 9001 too? Let's put them all in there. Why did they pick one? And the answer, of course, is that Mujica and his gang and they picked one that they thought was easy. They picked an easy one that they figured nobody was going to complain about. In the United States, we have very strong opinions about climate change, so there's people complaining here. But the rest of the world kind of nods their head and says, oh yeah, that's good. Plus, climate change is something that China likes to pretend it cares about when we know China doesn't. And of course, anything ISO does, they have to placate China. So they picked one that China, they weren't going to go after stop war or like, let's have free elections, because China would go crazy. So they put the easy one inside ISO 9001. But where are the other 16? And they're not in there. And let me make, to quote my friend Nixon, let me make one thing perfectly clear. I think personally that climate change is important. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who don't believe me, but I've been personally affected by it, okay? So at a very young age, not a very young age, I mean, I'm an old guy, right? But too young an age, because I'm living down in Peru. Peru has the highest UV on the planet. I don't know why, I don't understand what it is, but if you go check, UV, for some reason, the ultraviolet here is higher than even like Saudi Arabia and all these other places that have sun. Something about where we are results in the highest UV in the planet, and it's dangerous. And so I had to have double cataract surgery at a very young age because my eyes were getting microwaved by the UV here, and because I was a dummy and didn't have UV protective glasses when I was wearing them. So I had to have double cataract surgery. I have to constantly get these spots on my face checked out. I can't stand outside in Peru for more than maybe, I'm not kidding, 6 or 7 minutes until I start to feel my skin cooking. And I can look at the temperature. The temperature might be like 70 degrees Fahrenheit or so, right? And I lived in Florida for years. I would go out in 90-degree weather and not have this problem. In Peru, you go out in 70-degree, even 60-degree, and you could feel your skin cooking. And that's the UV sensation. The tourists come down here and they wind up getting horribly burned because of this sun here. So I mean, this is something that I'm dealing with personally. That's not true when you go into other places, right? And I talked to the people here, and that just a generation ago, they said it wasn't true even for the Peruvians. The Peruvians now are slathering themselves with all kinds of sunblock, and of course they have a higher melanin count than I do, so they're darker, and they're burning up when their parents weren't. So this is a real thing. And I think it's deadly dangerous. But because I'm affected by it personally, and because I think it's important, that doesn't give me the right to put it into a standard that's going to affect, 1 million plus companies and affect all these other, people around the world. We have a standard for that. ISO 14000 is the right place to put it. And there are other standards that deal with greenhouse gases, etc. That's the place to put it. So I'm not going to put my personal thing that I think is important into a standard when it's off topic. And yet that's what they did. And then there's another point that nobody wants to talk about, right? Nigel Croft is out there banging his drum, talking about how, well, I can't understand why people don't understand this. You have to understand, of course, climate change affects you. Where did Nigel Croft come from? Where did the guy come from? Where he just popped up and now he's like this powerful character manipulating entire economies because he's able to manipulate an ISO 9001 standard and other standards. Where did this dude come from? You know where he came from? He went to school, he learned some metallurgy, he got a metallurgy degree, and he married the heiress of a steel mill in Brazil. And do you know who one of the biggest polluting industries is in Brazil? Steel mills. You know what they do is they chop down the rainforest and they use the timber to create charcoal to fire up their furnaces, which make pig iron, which is an element, which is a step they need in steel mill, in refining or whatever the heck they do, right? So I mean, that's what he was making money in an industry that was destroying the rainforest in Brazil, which is one of the last stands we have against global warming and climate change. And now, and he was rubbing shoulders with Lula, the president, wasn't the president at the time, but I guess Lula was working at the same company or whatever. His father-in-law was paying him a bunch of money. And that's the only reason that he started to get onto standards committees and things like that, mostly down in Brazil. And then because he's a Brit, He made his connections with BSI, and BSI, and he's a loyal foot soldier, so BSI tells him to do something, and he runs and he does it right away. And now, again, he's going out there and manipulating entire economies by telling people, oh, you know what? You're going to have to put climate change in ISO. You're going to have risk-based thinking. And the guy's just making this shit up. He's making it up. And where did he get his money? Not from being climate conscious, because now he's rebranded himself. He's a green warrior now. Has he worked to stop ISO's international travel? No, of course not. ISO has done nothing to stop international travel. Let me tell you something. You can help develop a standard through a Zoom meeting. You don't need to be flying all around, going to Disney World and going to Rwanda and going to the beaches in Jamaica. You don't need any of that stuff. You can do it all online. Does ISO demand that? No. They want to have people flying around because it's the only way they can get volunteers, because the volunteers want to go and fly to a beach and write it off on their taxes as a business trip. All right. And have they implemented a policy that says, hey, we're not going to do printed standards anymore. We're only going to do electronic standards? Nope. They're still doing printed standards. Means they're cutting down trees. They're using petroleum to make ink, and they're still damaging the environment. So ISO is not serious about climate change. They just want you to pretend you're serious about climate change so that Sergio Mujica from Chile can become the UN Secretary General, and so Nigel Croft can do whatever he wants and try to become a big, powerful figure and I guess get out from under the shadow of his father-in-law. It's sad. It's pathetic. Don't fall for this stuff. Don't. If you're frustrated and outraged, the only thing you can do is write to your national standards member, the ISO member, find out who that is. In the United States, it's the US tag. It's ANSI. You got to write to the president of ANSI, right, Joe Bhatia, and tell him, this is outrageous. You're affecting our economy, the economy of a company, but the economy of countries, by creating these ridiculously overly expensive standards that take a lot of money to implement, and you're not basing it on actual best practices, and you're just doing it to help a couple guys improve their career. And look at this. Thing's freaking empty. It's empty.